Hello, welcome to the recording of the New Mexico 556 Tramway Boulevard Corridor Public Meeting Number 1 recording. The original meeting was held on August 5th, 2025. The original presenters were Nancy Perea with the NMDOT, Paul Barraclough with Lee Engineering, Zach Troncoso with Parametrics, and Jeff Pradine with Parametrics. I, Paul Barraclough, will be doing the introduction and a general proportion of the presentation. One of the big goals for tonight's meeting is to get input from the public on the existing conditions that are presented here and the ideas that we're moving forward with. Being post-meeting, the best ways to do that are option 3 and option 4 on our slide here today. The first one being visiting the project website. That can be accessed through this link, or that can be accessed through the QR code. Additionally, we have an email for the project, Tramway Safety Study at parametrics.com. Either of these ways can be used to contact the team. We ask that submissions be presented by August 31st. That way we can wrap up the comments on the first public meeting and advance towards the rest of the project. One of the reasons we are recording this secondary meeting is that we had a conflict with the 2025 National Night Out. Unfortunately, we had sent out the meeting invites before we found out about this conflict. This recording will suffice in lieu of everyone being able to attend that evening, and it will be posted on the project website. Overall, the presentation of tonight will cover the introduction, the NEPA process that guides the study, the schedule, the background, and methodologies used in the study, the existing conditions that we found, summary of challenges, potential mitigations to start the conversation, and then we'll document the next steps as this project moves forward. The study area is Tramway Boulevard on the north end, Winona Avenue on the south end. The study area also has many jurisdictional partners within it. The NMDOT is the New Mexico Department of Transportation, is the owner of the road. The City of Albuquerque is the maintainer of the City of Albuquerque section, shown here in pink, and the Bernalillo County operates the unhighlighted section on the north end of the corridor.
So I'll be speaking tonight about the environmental clearance for the project. That's all driven by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which is a very common acronym. So NEPA, in a very general sense, it requires agencies to consider and then demonstrate and document that they ultimately identified a recommendation or a project that best avoids and minimizes environmental impacts and mitigates those impacts that cannot be avoided, while still meeting the need for a specific project. And it's defining that need for the tramway corridor that we're here tonight to discuss. So the general steps in the overall NEPA process are to initiate a study and develop a project purpose and need statement, then decide on a class of action. That could be a categorical exclusion, an environmental assessment, or an environmental impact statement. All three of those classes have a very similar level of analysis, environmental analysis that goes into them, but the level of documentation and processing differs among those, with a categorical exclusion being the most streamlined and an environmental impact statement being the most complex. Then we complete all of the environmental analyses needed to identify all the environmental considerations and determine if there is an impact or not from the project and mitigate all of those concerns. And throughout the entire process, we will have a strong public involvement component, and we're initiating that process tonight. Ultimately, we get to a decision document, which is an authorization for a project to proceed to things like final design and construction. With the Department of Transportation, this process is called the location study procedures, and they divide that into 4 sub-phases, with phase A where you really define the need for a project and develop a suite of different alternatives that could potentially solve that need, and then do some high-level analysis to see if there are fatal flaws with any of the alternatives. Then you go into phase B, which is a more detailed analysis of the alternatives, resulting in a preferred alternative. And then phase C is the actual documentation of the NEPA process, with phase D being preliminary design. And as you can see on the graphic there, phases A and B overlap, phases C and D overlap. This is intentional. Oftentimes we do a combined phase A, phase B study. That's exactly what we're doing for this tramway study. And oftentimes the environmental documentation is occurring concurrently with preliminary design. So we have started the process of developing that purpose and need, and you can see from the text on the slide, it's incredibly general. But we will add additional information and support for that as the study goes on. The purpose for the New Mexico 556 corridor study is to identify physical, operational, and safety improvement needs. The needs are based on various geometric challenges at the intersections, non-compliant Americans with Disabilities Act facilities, aging signal infrastructure, deteriorating system performance. What we really mean by that is traffic, how difficult it is to get through an intersection during rush hour. And then of course crash history, which relates to safety throughout the corridor.
Thanks, Jeff. Now we'll dive into the study schedule. As seen on the screen, the project started with the data collection and field visits in the fall of 2024. That was quickly followed by a road safety audit day workshop, a kind of minimized version of the formal road safety audit process. We have prepared the majority of the existing conditions report, and we are here today at the public meeting at the late summer of 2025. Looking ahead, after including the comments from this meeting, we will advance into alternative analyses, create a draft report late this winter. We will revisit this group with a public meeting, most likely early spring, and a final report to follow. Now a bit on the study background. Tramway Boulevard has a rich history. It should be self-explanatory that the roadway started in the 50s and 60s as a planned access to the Sandia Peak Tram projects. At that point, it was a 2-lane road. In the 90s, it was widened to the 4-lane divided general layout that you see today. With that, the infrastructure is approaching 30 years old and has some opportunities to be improved. Also of note on the history of this corridor, in 2021, there were a few striping changes, mostly around the free right turns and acceleration lanes while entering tramway from the side streets. Expanding on the study area, the functional class of this roadway is a principal arterial. Functional class ranges from local, think of your neighborhood streets, collectors, minor arterials, and then principal arterials. The major function of a principal arterial is to move traffic, and the secondary function is to provide the multimodal access to the communities. The corridor length is 8.5 miles, It contains 21 signalized intersections and 5 side street stop-controlled intersections. The speed limit on the majority of the corridor is 50 miles an hour. On the south end of the corridor, towards Encanto and Central Avenue, it reduces to 45 miles an hour. South of Central Avenue, it reduces to 35 miles an hour. Again, there are 2 lanes in each direction. Important to note is there is a multi-use trail on the east side, limited pedestrian facilities on the west side. It does have on-street bike lanes and a large shoulder. Diving further into the existing conditions, we'll talk about how we establish those existing conditions and what we found. We collected volume, speed, and classification data from several locations throughout the corridor. We collected turning movement counts at the signalized intersections. We completed the Road Safety Audit Day workshop of a multidisciplinary team. We looked at the most recent 5 years of crash data available. And with all of that, we looked at the capacity of the roadway and its ability to process traffic. The average daily traffic on Tramway Boulevard ranges from 6,500 to nearly 30,000 vehicles per day. The lowest volume segment is on the north end of the corridor, and 2 highest volume segments are just south of Montgomery and the approach to Central Avenue and the interchanges. The truck percentage is 0.7 to 1.0. For reference, other principal arterials have truck percentages of 2.5 to 3. Looking at the speed data that we collected, there were 3 locations, south of San Rafael, south of Comanche, and south of Lomas. The overall 85th percentile for the San Rafael and the Lomas centered around 55 miles per hour. That is to say that 85% of the traffic on the roadway is traveling below 56.5 miles per hour in the case of San Rafael. Looking further into the speeds, San Rafael will be on the top, Lomas data will be on the bottom. The left figures show the, in 5 mile per hour bends, the speed profile for the corridor. Again, you see the majority of the traffic traveling less than 51 to 56 miles per hour. Similarly with the Lomas locations. On the right side, we have identified several bends of traffic that is exceeding the speed limit by time of day. This being noon on the left and midnight on the right. We can see through the greater presence of the turquoise that in the late hours, folks are traveling over 65 miles per hour and more frequency. From the traffic data, we put that into our traffic models and we solicited traffic projections from the Mid-Region Council of Governments. When we look at the operations of the corridor, there were 8 intersections that experienced a level of service E or F. Level of service is a grade assigned to the performance of a movement or intersection that mimics a grade school scale, A being the best and F being the worst. A is a free flow condition with very, very limited factors that influence your driving. C and D are generally pretty congested, but traffic is able to move. And E and F describe situations where traffic is very heavy and you may have multiple cycles required to get through a traffic signal. Stemming from that analysis, we also looked at queuing, the locations where the queues exceeded the available storage distance. You can see on the south end of the corridor, near Central and the interchange, there were several locations that exceeded the available queue storage area. Concurrently, while we collected the traffic volumes, we also collected pedestrian and bicycle volumes. What we see here on the left is the pedestrian volumes. The lighter shades are 1 to 30 pedestrians per day, and the darker shades exceed 100 and up to 140 pedestrians per day. The highest pedestrian volumes are located a majority of the north end of the corridor, with a bump again at Lomas. When we look at the bicycles, we using the same or similar scale, we see again that the majority of the cycle traffic is on the north end of the corridor, and some of that is limited to the south end. As discussed, the project completed a road safety audit day. A road safety audit is a formal process developed by the FHWA, or Federal Highway Administration, to assess the safety on corridors or projects being constructed. It's a formal process, and what we did is take out one day, one event of that formal process and insert it into this project. To do that, we looked at the AM hours at Comanche, the midday hours at Lomas, and the PM peak hours at Central. We gathered the stakeholders, approximately a team of 20 folks that have operating and maintaining and ownership of the corridor. And as you see in the photo, we walked the intersections, we pressed the buttons, and analyzed the operations in the field. Those notes went back into this study and will help shape the projects moving forward.
One of the other major metrics we looked at was crashes throughout the corridor. We took a comprehensive crash analysis from 2018 to 2022 to better understand what types of crashes and what locations were experiencing high amounts of crashes throughout the entirety of the corridor. All of the crashes were categorized into 3 typical categories, and what you'll see is property damage, which means typically a rear end, fatal crashes, which means someone was deceased, and injury crashes in which someone was injured. So in evaluating all of these crashes, we used what's called the predictive crash analysis for the 4-leg signalized intersections. And what this means is for every intersection, we're able to use all the inputs from the intersection. So how many lanes we have coming in, the average speeds of cars coming in, the types of grades of the traffic volumes for every intersection, and it tells us what the typical intersection should receive in crashes based on all those metrics. We compared that against the actual crash data we obtained to better understand which intersections perform better and which intersections don't perform good as related to the predictive crash analysis. And so what you'll see on this map on the right is some of the worst intersections highlighted in red and some of the best intersections highlighted in green. Some of the worst intersections being Montgomery and Tramway, some of the intersections leading up to the I-40 interchange, on and off ramps, and at Central Boulevard. We use this as somewhat of a prioritization metric to better understand what types of crashes at intersections are more prevalent, why, and what we can do to try and mitigate those types of incidents. So typically what you'll see here is the southern half of the project typically has more crashes as it compared to the predictive crash analysis than the northern portion. What's interesting about this is a few slides back we talked about the concentration of ped and bikes, and so the concentration of ped and bikes is to the north, which you see better performing intersections, and the concentration of crashes as it compared to the predictive crash analysis tend to be to the south. What you'll see here is a graph showing the crash severity by intersection. So every intersection is plotted here from, if you start from the left to the right, that'll be from north to south. And so as we discussed earlier, the eastbound off-ramp, the Central Avenue intersection, and the Montgomery Boulevard intersection tend to have some of the worst crashes by number of crashes, so including property damage, injury crash, and fatalities. This next graph shows the number of pedestrians and cyclists crashes by intersection. And so what I had mentioned earlier, this actually sums up that information. So you see a higher number of pedestrian and bicycle involved accidents to the south or to the right side of this graph as you do to the left. As compared to the previous graph, in showing where pedestrians and bicyclists typically reside, there's a higher concentration of pedestrians and bicyclists in the northern half. And so this is a metric that kind of tells us that there's an issue with some of the pedestrian and bicycle conflicts and other issues that we want to take a further look into for the northern portion of the corridor. Not that we shouldn't be looking at this for the entirety of the project. We further analyze this data by taking a subset of the overall crash data and looking at one typical intersection. And so we chose the intersection of Montgomery and Tramway for a few reasons. One, this intersection operates as a typical intersection in terms of geometry as most of the other intersections within the project. And two, this was one of the worst performing intersections as it relates to the predictive crash analysis for crashes at the intersection. And so what we did here was pull the actual police reports for this intersection to take a deeper dive into understanding what types of crashes are happening and where these crashes are occurring, to try and help us use a data-driven approach to understand what types of things we can implement to improve safety for all modes of traffic, but all crashes as well. So the first schematic you see here is left turn crashes, and so there's a significant amount of left turn crashes at this intersection from 2018 to 2022. Although it looks a little confusing, you can see kind of numbers pop out at you, and so the number 18 meaning that there was 18 crashes from people turning left going westbound on Montgomery, and people either going through or turning left going eastbound on Montgomery trying to get onto Tramway. And so there's a high number of these types of crashes at this intersection, and overall there was a high number of left turning crashes throughout the corridor, but we're able to understand what types of incidents by looking at the police reports. Another category of crashes that we see throughout this intersection is right turning crashes. In specific, we'll highlight two areas. One, the right turns going northbound Tramway to eastbound Montgomery. There was 2 incidents with bicyclists crossing either the path or the crosswalk, and vehicles failing to yield to those bicyclists. In addition to that, there were 16 rear end incidents between cars at the free right, and which you'll see in the bottom left corner. A free right, you'll see at a lot of these intersections, but allows vehicles traveling on the side streets to kind of have an accelerated free right onto Tramway Boulevard, and we see a lot of rear end incidents related to these types of movements. The highest number of crashes throughout the corridor, but also throughout this intersection, relate to rear end crashes. There were rear end crashes on all 4 legs of the intersection, some of the most being at the free rights, in the right turn lane for Tramway, and in the left turn for northbound Tramway. Rear end crashes again, were recorded for the entirety of the corridor, but were also prevalent for this intersection. Another type of crash that was documented in the police reports and that some people may have witnessed in driving on Tramway is a lot of red light running. And so a lot of crashes at this intersection are related to red light running vehicles. Whether vehicles are speeding through on Tramway, rushing to try and get the left turn arrow and are too late, or people just blatantly running red lights late at night, early in the morning when they think that there's nobody else around. These types of incidents happen far too often, and this is something we'll be looking at to better understand how we can help improve traffic to mitigate these types of incidents. There was also one incident involving a pedestrian when someone ran a red light for a pedestrian crossing the north to southbound crosswalk on the east side of the intersection. This last figure sums up just the pedestrian cyclists involved crashing to separate them out from the rest of the vehicles, and we did discuss this earlier, but there were the two incidents with right turning vehicles and the one incident with the red light, a vehicle running a red light and striking a pedestrian in the crosswalk. All of this information will be used to really further evaluate how we can improve the safety of not only this intersection, but all of the intersections. And this was kind of a case study or further zoom in of the types of incidents we see corridor wide, and to kind of give us an indicator of what things to expect at the remainder of the intersections.
Shifting gears from some of the data-driven approaches, now we're going to take a look at some of the other corridor features that also have been identified for improvements. One of the first things that we see that makes this corridor a little bit different than other areas is that it was originally designed with free-flowing right turn channelized. In its original state, the right-turning vehicles, in this case eastbound to southbound, would have an acceleration lane where it would enter the traffic and then merge into the two existing lanes. As traffic has grown, these operations have actually become a safety issue. One of the first things of this safety issue is that the right-of-way designation between the bike lane and this free-flowing vehicle is not clearly identified. And as the cycling traffic has increased, these occurrences and this situation has become more prominent and needs mitigation. This striping was redone in 2021 so that the vehicles using the right turn should yield before entering the traffic. Additionally, this turning movement causes other conflicts with driver abilities. Many parts of our population have neck mobility issues. The guidance is to have this, as you see in the figure below, the vehicle trying to look over their shoulder to find a gap. The guidance is to have that angle less than 20 degrees. You see here that it's more than 90 degrees, and it's can be straining on folks. Additionally, these type of maneuvers are higher speeds, and again, they have challenges with pedestrian and bicycle conflicts. On the other side of the intersection, the original Tramway Boulevard had acceleration lanes. In this case, not a free ride, but once the vehicle would make that turn, they had some space to accelerate and merge into traffic. These lanes are no longer the preferred method, and thus this section was restriped to include a bike lane and a shoulder area marked off with chevron striping. What we did find in the field is that folks are still using this area as an acceleration lane. in conflict with the bicycle lane. Additionally, we found that the corridor's compliance with the American Disabilities Act, ADA, definitely needs some improvement. In the figures to the left, you'll see that one, the sidewalk does not continue to the north. This is very common in the corridor where there are no facilities, very few facilities on the west side of the corridor. And additionally, the button has some access issues. In the center, you see here the button for the traffic signal pedestrian detection is located on crusher fine gravel, not the best use of a firm and stable ground. It's also located behind the curb. You can imagine that somebody in a wheelchair or a walker would have a hard time reaching this button and making it back to the intersection for its walk period. Additionally, in the right photo, you will see deficient curb ramps. This ramp serves maybe as drainage and maybe as pedestrian access. It definitely is not up to current standards and will be recommended for improvements. As part of our inventory for the corridor, we examined the existing roadway and trail lighting. What we found was the lighting at the intersection proper was pretty non-existent, very limited activity. This is surprising, as this is the area where all the conflicts exist, and lighting does provide significant value for safety. We found that there are lights on the approaches to the intersection. The left turn and right turn lanes do have approach lighting, but it's really isolated to those areas. We found that there is near zero lighting between the intersections or between these approach areas. Additionally, one of the conversations that we're going to have is whether lighting should also be provided on the trails. Looking at some of the other safety mitigations we can make for this corridor, one of the most prominent areas for improvement is the traffic signal infrastructure. As we described, it is aging, and there are several things and standards that have been updated and are now best practices. The ones that you can see here in this photo are the current guidance asks for 2 signals or 1 signal per lane over the roadway. So in this case, you only have 1 traffic signal indicator over the roadway, and it's almost over the bike lane more than it is the traffic. Additionally, this location has a median mounted left turn signal. The new standards require that to be up in the air and for better visibility and safety. Diving further into some safety improvements and building on the aging infrastructure, there is a lot of opportunities to modernize and impact efficiency and safety. One of the most prominent, and you may have seen these around the city of Albuquerque already, is the flashing yellow arrow. This flashing yellow arrow phase serves very much like a green ball, where you're allowed to take the left turn if there's a large enough gap in traffic for you to make that left turn. The flashing yellow arrow does use the amber color to imply caution, and by flashing, it does allow for that movement to be made should there be enough time and to make a safe maneuver. One of the biggest features that this can do is allow us to do this by time of day. In that way, when traffic is busy, we can use the green arrow, a protected arrow, to protect the left turns when there aren't very many gaps or the traffic is very heavy. Then when traffic is not heavy, we can use the flashing yellow arrow to allow that permissive left turn and better react to the traffic that's present. Another feature that the agencies throughout the Albuquerque area are using are automated traffic signal performance measures. Said simply, this allows better data collection and recording of that data so that the traffic signal engineers can make better decisions in the future. For this project, we have collected several days of data on the traffic for the traffic analysis. In the automated traffic signal performance measures procedures, that data is being collected every day, and it will document the number of times the pedestrian button is pushed, the number of times an emergency vehicle requests preemption through the intersection, and on down the line. And with that data, again, the traffic engineers can make better data-driven decisions on operations and safety. Digging even further, there are more techniques that we can use to improve safety for the corridor. Pedestrian Protect is a feature where when we can leverage the flashing yellow arrows and the ability to turn those the flashing yellow arrow on and off. In a Ped Protect scenario, when the pedestrian button is pressed, we would require that the next phase of the traffic signal only use the green arrow, thereby separating the pedestrian crossing and the traffic signal left turn movement in time. If we look at the left turn pedestrian indicator, that is an option that basically addresses the same challenge, but it alerts when the pedestrian button is pressed, it alerts the driver that there may be a pedestrian on that crossing that he's or she is about to cross. So it gives that driver an indication that, yes, please look to the left and see if there's a conflicting pedestrian in that area. Other things that can be done through the traffic signal systems is no right turn on red and the implementation of leading pedestrian intervals. The leading pedestrian interval is a period of time before the green where pedestrians are allowed to enter the roadway, declare their space, and be seen by traffic as they begin their green movement. Additionally, we've examined the geometry of the Tramway Boulevard corridor. Many of the intersections are similarly designed, and therefore these improvements can be used over and over throughout the corridor. We are ensuring that the turn bay links are long enough to hold the predicted cues. We are looking at the turning radii to make sure that they are up to the current standard. We are looking at the permissive sight distance so that we ensure that a vehicle turning on a green ball, or if improved, a flashing yellow arrow, has the distance required to be seen and see conflicting traffic. We are looking to remove channelized right turns, pulling those movements into the intersection and making safer pedestrian and cyclist crossings. That will also improve the sight angles and, as we talked about earlier, minimize the over-the-shoulder merges. And we, as typical, we would mitigate the level of service E and F movements predicted now and in the future. Stepping towards our multimodal and complete streets part of the project, we are looking to enhance the American Disability Act compliance at all crossings. So there's quite a few throughout the corridor and lots of opportunities to improve those. One of the things that we have identified is the trail on the west side could also add value. You see in the top left of this photo, there is a dirt path where it shows the desire of pedestrians to use a facility on the west side of the corridor. Additionally, one of the unfortunate incidents in our crash data was earlier this year, where a pedestrian walking southbound on the shoulder was hit. And one could imagine that having facilities separated from the roadway and the shoulder could help make that a safer action. In summary, we have identified these major parts of the corridor. The first one being speed compliance. We see that the 85th percentile is at or above 5 miles over the speed limit. In addition, we saw many vehicles traveling upwards of 15 or more over the speed limit. These concerns are directly related to some of the citizens' concerns about noise and nuisance driving. There is a tendency for drag racing, speeding, in excess of 20, 30, 40 miles an hour over the speed limit. Additionally, we have identified several areas where the corridor performance can be improved. Most of these rely on the south, down towards Central and the interchange. We are looking to improve the level of service and the queuing areas. Throughout the corridor, we'll be improving the multimodal compliance and connections, looking for those opportunities where we can make better use of the corridor to provide multimodal connections. Resulting from our crash mitigation, we saw that left turns were the most severe crashes, and we have an opportunity to use some of these signal system improvements to make improvements in this area. The left turn flashing arrow can do that. Additionally, the rear ends were the most frequent crashes. Using 2 overhead traffic signals can improve safety in that area, as well as improve safety for red light running crashes. Throughout the corridor, we'll be looking to improve bicycle and pedestrian conflicts. As we discussed, the geometric improvements have opportunities to improve the turning radii and sight distance. And throughout this process, the traffic signal upgrades will not only improve aging infrastructure, but use the latest and greatest and best practices for traffic detection and compliance. Looking forward, the next steps. The goal of this project is, again, to look for those high priority improvements that we can make this corridor safer and more accessible. This study will continue to develop and to create design concepts for the next stages in the projects, where they will be turned from plans into design and look for funding. It should be noted that while this study is going on for the whole corridor, there are no funds currently designated to move this into final design or construction. Just quickly, the draft report will be available late winter, public meeting most likely early spring, and a final report at the beginning of the summer. Again, the goal of this presentation and this recording here today is to get feedback and comments from the public. That can be done via the website at this link or by scanning the QR code. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions about today's recording, you can also enter that in the website.